Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Kaufman. Welcome to our 188th installment of the Torah portion of the week. We are holding by Parshas Shoftim. Parshas Shoftim speaks about the establishment of just courts, speaks about death penalty for an idol worshiper, talks about the rebellious elder, talks about the king of the Jewish people, talks about prophecy, cities of refuge, speaks about unsolved murder and the axed heifer. So it speaks about a lot of different things, a lot of interesting topics. We're going to see at the end of the parsha, it speaks about this unsolved murder. And the Torah tells me in chapter 21, verse 1, if a corpse be found in the land Hashem your God gives to you to possess, fell in the field, you don't know who killed it. Your elders, your judges, go out, measure toward the cities that are around the corpse, verse 2, and it shall be in that city near the corpse, whatever, that the elders of the city shall take a heifer. No work has been done which is not pulled with a yoke, and they're going to kill it. Right? They're going to kill it. So in verse 6 it says, all the elders of that city closest to the corpse, they're going to wash their hands over the heifer that was axed in the valley. They're going to speak up, verse 7, and they're going to say, our hands do not spill this blood, our eyes do not see. And then verse 8, this is the verse we want to see, and that is, atone for your people Israel, that you have redeemed, O Hashem, do not place innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, and the blood shall be atoned for them. So, speak about this axed heifer. We're not going to really go too much into detail about it, but there is one aspect of that, as we mentioned in verse 8, that I want to go into a little bit, and that's about the fact that there needs to be an atonement, even though this heifer is killed, still you need to do atonement. It says, Mori Rebbe, a Rav Agon Moshlita, should be well, brings down and Tam Vedas. He says, it's commentary on Chumash, brings down a Medrash. The Medrash brings down from the Talmud, Tractate Krisus, 26a, right, page 26a, and he says that there needs to be an atonement for the Jews that came out of Egypt. Because we know the Jews that came out of Egypt, they suffer 40 years in the desert, they go around in circles seemingly, and they're condemned to death because of the sin of the spies. Because of the sin of the spies, what was that? They spoke Lashon Hara, they spoke badly against the land of Israel. So, they're condemned to death. But Rebbe says they still need atonement. Being condemned to death and suffering in the desert, the heat, the cold, everything else, even though they had all their needs taken care of. Very good. But they still need atonement. Right? Rebbe here says they still need atonement. So Rebbe says, okay, he says the miracles that were done in the land of Egypt, what did it was supposed to show them something. It was supposed to show that generation the unbelievable power of God. Now you have to understand, less than 20%, not less, 20% of the Jewish people come out of Egypt. That means 80% died. So if you do the math, we know that between 2 and 3 million people came out of Egypt, because how many Jews does the Torah tell me went to Mount Sinai? 600,000 men between ages 20 and 60, not including women and children. Right, we're talking about 2 to 3 million people. Even if it's 2 million people, that means 8 million people died in Egypt. Right, and finished dying by the plague of darkness. Because they didn't want to come out. Right, but that whole thing over there really, really boggles the mind. Right, but the thing is that they spoke Lashon Hara. They spoke Lashon Hara against the land of Israel. And they're condemned to death. Even though they're condemned to death, they still need atonement. So God shows all the miracles. They saw all the miracles. They complain in the desert. All places they complain in the desert. They say, where's the fish? We missed the fish we had in Egypt. What about the watermelon? What about the vegetables? What about all the stuff we had in Egypt? What about the miracles? Didn't God show them all the miracles? God showed them all the miracles. Right? Nonetheless, they complain. So the Torah tells us all all the places they stopped. Every last place they stopped in the desert. In order, what would be the point? What would be the point of reminding them, okay, you went from A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E, E to F. Right? They made 42 stops in the desert. So why does God have to remind them? What's the purpose? The Torah never minces words. There are no words that are superfluous in the Torah. There are no words in the Torah that are superfluous. Why spend so much time telling me each place they went? So whenever he says, what did God want over here? God wants to instill in them emunah. Belief in Him until it has such an effect on them and others forever. In other words, God was building them up in the desert. God wanted them to work on their emunah, and at a certain level they failed. Again, we can't imagine who these people were. They were the greatest generation in the history of man that saw God face to face at Mount Sinai. So very hard to understand their complaints. You know, we're missing the fish and the watermelon and all that. Very, very difficult to understand. But what does my Rebbe here say? God wanted to instill in these people, in the Jewish people, wants to instill in them belief in Him. Now I would say, again, I'm a simple person, I would say very simply, isn't it true God took them out of Egypt? Yes. The ones that survived? Yes. Isn't it true they saw all the miracles? Yes. Didn't they see God face to face at Mount Sinai? Yes. So how come their emunah wasn't so high? How come they sinned with the golden calf? How come they complain in the desert? Seemingly they're lacking in emunah. Right? At some level they're lacking in emunah. So God wants to instill in them and wants them to work hard on emunah. So what does God teach them? God teaches the generation in the desert bitachon, belief in Him, faith in Him, etc. So they'll be able to pass that down to their kids. And their kids will pass it down to their kids. There'll be a link in a chain because they saw the ultimate. They saw God face to face. Right? They heard the word. They saw the thunder and lightning. They went through the miracles. When you give that over to your children, you tell them the story, and it's not a story they heard. That was just hearsay. The father telling over the story was there. So the son will tell his son, my father, your grandfather, told me the story because he was there. And he'll tell his son, for all generations. Though even though you're much further down, meaning 3,000 years later, or really 2,500 years later, that's still passed out. Now if it happened a few generations later, 100 years later, 200 years later, you can still say, well, your great-great-great-grandfather saw it. Now, you say it today, it's like you have to say it 50 times. Great, etc. Doesn't mean it's less true. Right, because we're linking that chain. There were 2 to 3 million eyewitnesses. Not a bunch of drunks like by the Christians or by the Muslims. They had no witnesses. No witnesses to prove it. That God came to them, told them this thing, whatever it was. So you know it's a fake. You absolutely know it can't be true. Why not? No witnesses. So what do I care what they say? Who knows? Who knows why it happened? Or how it happened? I can't prove it. This I can prove. How can I prove? How can I show over here divine authorship? Because God spoke to Moshe. God says Moses believed in my house for everything. God gave a stamp of approval at Mount Sinai. 3 million people. Not hearsay. They were all eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses passed it down. This is what I saw. Right? It wasn't hearsay. It wasn't they heard it from someone else. Second hand, third hand, fifth hand. They saw it themselves. By seeing it themselves, that gives them credibility. They can't say they didn't see it. Can't say they didn't experience it, didn't witness it, they saw it. So if they saw the miracles, they saw what happened at Mount Sinai, what's the deal with the fish? What's the deal with watermelon? What's the deal with wanting all these things? Makes no sense. Right? Very, very hard to understand. But Rebbe here says the whole point was God wants to instill in them belief in Him. And through belief in Him, they're going to pass that down for all generations. Now, could be that you have further generations that are much weaker. Right? Further generations that are much weaker. Until, God forbid, someone who's evil comes along and kills someone. Right? In our case over here, you don't know who killed. Right? You have no idea who killed over here. Someone evil could have done it because of the weakening of generations. So what happened? How can that be? How could a Jew kill? So he says it must be that our forefathers did not instill the mitzvahs and the way they should be kept in a proper way. Right? Somehow they weren't able to give over the message to their kids. And therefore, there's a sin for the generations. That's one of the sins. The generations and the people coming out of Egypt, what do they need? They need atonement. They absolutely need atonement. So, interesting way of looking at it, because the fact that they came out of Egypt, and they saw all the miracles, and all the miracles in the desert, all the miracles by Mount Sinai, and they still didn't get the message. They still didn't internalize the message to where generations later, what can happen is you have somebody, or people, or more, or whatever, that sin, that do the wrong thing, that can murder someone. Because the emunah, bitachon, the belief in God is weak. Tremendously weak. Now again, this is also hard to understand. Very simply, because you're talking about the greatest generation in the history of man that saw God face to face at Mount Sinai. But however it works, God did not pass it down. Sorry, not God. God forbid. The people, that generation who spoke Lashon Hara against the land of Israel, had to wander around for 40 years, didn't pass the message down properly to their kids, because if they did, this never would have happened. And this would have been ripped out in the Torah. We wouldn't have needed it. And no one would murder because they could pass it down properly. And that's what happened. Seemingly, somehow, the message was not given. It wasn't, or let's say better, it wasn't given over properly. If it wasn't given over properly, then I can understand how such a thing could happen. Again, in theory, it's still very difficult. Right? You're talking about great people. If I'm talking about great people, then what's the problem? How could they not given it over? Right? I could say, no matter how high the IQ or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean a person can give that over to others. Right? Some people like that are just so brilliant, they can't teach. They don't have the ability to teach because they can't speak the language of everybody. They can't speak everyday language. right, in order to bring high, lofty ideas down to this world in a simplistic way. Now, it's not an easy thing to do. Not everybody certainly has the merit or is capable of doing that. Regardless, there's a claim against them. There's a claim against them. So, my Rebbe here then says, famous story with the Chofetz Chaim, and the story is with a doctor. There's a doctor that the Chofetz Chaim knew, and it was during the time that there were massacres going on in the Ukraine. And the doctor, there were massacres where Jews, many Jews were slaughtered, right? Many thousands of Jews slaughtered. And the doctor asked, how do I know that the creator of the world? Right? His children suffer. His children absolutely suffer. And God's quiet. And his children suffer. So how could he let these people slaughter the Jewish people? Right? That's the doctor's claim. Or that's his question. Comes on the Chofetz Chaim and says, how do I know you're a doctor? So what does the doctor do? Goes to his wall where he's got his plaque. Right? What does he have up there? He's got a copy. He's got a copy of the fact that he went to medical school, passed all the exams. He's got his diploma, pretty much, from medical school. So, the Chofetz Chaim looks at this document, and he says, very good, but I see this document is 40 years old. Right? It's more than 40 years old. So, the doctor says, right, it doesn't have to be enough that, it's not enough the fact that 40 years ago I passed all my requisite exams. I need to go pass my exams every day, every week, every month to prove I'm a doctor. That proves I'm a doctor. Right? I passed the exams once upon a time. Right? And now people rely on me as a doctor because of what I did in the past. So, answers the Chofetz Chaim. So too our Father in heaven. Right? He showed us his strong hand and his unbelievable power. What did he do? Took us out of Egypt. And he showed the whole world that he's the creator of the world. And that gives credibility or testimony to the fact that he created the world. Because if he took them out of Egypt, and no other nation ever came out of Egypt, all other nations enslaved got stuck there, never got out, except the Jewish people. God decimates, as the Torah tells us, totally decimates Egypt, destroys their culture or agriculture, animals, wealth. They took the wealth out, killed the firstborn. God shows his power. God shows his unbelievable power. So God shows his unbelievable power. He shows he's creator of the world. So that's not a leap of faith to say, you know what? If God did that, if the God of the Jewish people did such an unbelievable thing, then it's obvious he created the world. Right? That is not a leap of faith. Because if he intervenes in history, then ipso facto we should say, he is nature. He is in control. Because there's no other source. Nothing ever happened like this in the history of man. No other quote-unquote religion. The 80,000 religions out there. No one makes such a claim. No one ever makes such a claim. that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people and all that. And within the Torah, this story, right, takes up a lot of space coming out of Egypt. So it gives testimony to the fact He created the world. But He says, my Rebbe here says though, in order for us to believe in that proper faith in Him and receive merits for keeping the mitzvahs that we do, we have a choice. We all have a choice. What's the choice? Either life or death. That is the choice. We could go one way, go the other way. So if God wouldn't smack us upside the head in every generation, and rather, let's say God would show us miracle after miracle after miracle, just like what happened in Egypt, what would happen? No free will. Because if we all see miracles, right, we all see miracles left and right, how could a person ever choose to do bad? Obviously, God doesn't want you to do bad. True. But the reality is, He gives you the right to choose. You want to do the wrong thing? Path is open. You want to do the right thing? Path is also open. I give you the opportunity to do both. So therefore, if it was all miraculous, you wouldn't have free will, and then there wouldn't be reward and punishment. If I didn't have free will, well, how's there reward and punishment? There should be no reward and punishment. Except comes along God, and God commands that you tell in every generation the great story that happened in Egypt, the miracles that occurred, and what the Jewish people went through in order to establish in the hearts of our children, grandchildren, etc., this belief, and that God runs the world and God's in charge. That was the obligation of the Jews that came out of Egypt. And they have to give that over. And we have to give that over to our kids. So my Rebbe says, that shows God runs the world. That shows God's in charge. That's God's stamp in this world. In other words, with all the other things going on in the world, and the fact that Jewish people suffer tremendously, what does it show? It shows that if we wouldn't suffer, we wouldn't go through difficulty, we would have free will. Right? But it shows God's control in the world. That's what it shows. So, my Rebbe here then says that God Himself reveals to the generation that was in the desert a huge thing. He showed them His power. He showed them His might. He showed them His control of nature. For that, they were supposed to pass it down properly to the next generations. And had they done it right, you wouldn't have this sin. This sin, if someone gets killed, you don't know who the murderer is. You wouldn't have it. So that's why people coming out of Egypt need atonement. Now again, this is a mind-boggling idea. It's a mind-boggling idea for a few reasons. One reason is we don't know who the generation that came out of Egypt saw God on Mount Sinai. We don't have a clue who they are. We don't have a clue what they went through. And the spiritual levels that God was able to get out of them, make them into a nation, come to Mount Sinai. So they themselves, when you look in the book of Numbers, where the Torah tells me many stories that seemingly face value don't make sense. Sin of the spies, how can they speak badly against the land of Israel? Where was their emunah? Where is their faith, their belief in God? Korach! What happened to Korach? Fights against Moshe Rabbeinu. What about all the complaints? The fish? The watermelon? Look what we missed in Egypt! You're bringing us to the desert to die! Face value? These are awesome questions. At face value, these questions don't make sense. How can you say they're great questions, they don't make sense? They're great questions because they should be asked. Right? They should be asked, how could they have done it? How could they have done these things? But if we understand who they are, at a base level, is it possible to even ask the question? The question's a non-starter. There's obviously information missing. Because if they were so great as we understand them to be, they don't think God can destroy the nations and the land? Even if they're giants and we're like grasshoppers? Didn't God decimate Egypt? Didn't God bring manna every day? Didn't they see the thunder and the lightning at Mount Sinai? They heard it, they saw it. But Mervier points out there was something missing. What was something missing? What was missing was that faith and belief. At a very high level, God wanted them to reach. Because ultimately, God put them in a situation to test them. And had they passed the test, not spoken badly against the land of Israel, they would have gone straight into the land. That's it. But the fact they speak badly, God says, okay, you don't have faith in me? Maybe they felt, and this is part of the answer, maybe they felt they weren't worthy anymore. Maybe God's going to dump them. God forbid. They're just not on the level. Or so they thought. God was building them up for that. Because you have to remember, the manna was whatever they wanted to taste like. And when it was gone, it was gone. Now you're living in the desert. No way to make food. What's going to be tomorrow? You know what they say, old Mother Hubbard, ain't nothing in the cupboard. What's going to be? What in the world's going to be? Just because I had the manna yesterday, the day before that, double portion on Friday, who says it's coming the next day? Is there any guarantee? No guarantee necessarily. God said he'll take care of their needs and all that. Okay, but maybe they do something to sin. Maybe their thoughts are not all there, not all focused, whatever. Maybe they're lacking in something God's not going to fulfill. He's not going to fulfill what he said because you broke what he said. Maybe that's a partial answer. Right, what's proof? Go back to Yaakov Avinu. Let's go back to our father Jacob. What happened? He's going to meet up with Esav, and he tells God, I need bread, I need water, I need you to protect me. God says, I'll take care of it, don't worry. You got nothing to worry about. And Yaakov asks him again. Now, if God promises you something, he says tomorrow You're going to buy a lottery ticket. You're going to win the lottery. Everything's good. And you do it tomorrow and you win the lottery. Okay? Right? If God says it, forget any fakes, anything else. God himself is saying this. If God says it, then it's going to happen. So if God tells him, don't worry, Yaakov, I'll take care of it. You got nothing to worry about. He asks him again. Where's his faith? Where's his belief in God? So Rashi there says, you didn't lack faith. What was the issue? Maybe I'll do something to sin. I don't deserve the divine protection. Maybe I'm not on the level because I may do something wrong. Could be, is what the people in the desert thought. Maybe I'm not on the level. And maybe I'll do something to sin. And if I do that, no more bread. No more food. God could break his covenant if we don't do what we're supposed to do. Again, you tell me the covenant's forever. It's true. God's not going to break the covenant. But maybe they themselves, maybe many of them just are not on the level. But God says this is exactly the point. I put you in a situation in order to bring you up to snuff. I wanted you to be on a very high spiritual level. Had you put it in your heart, like I wanted you to put it in your heart, you would have gone straight into the promised land. You would have gone straight into Israel. But you didn't. So I had to send you around China in order to get there. So here, there's something lacking in the generation that was in the desert. That the miracles and the greatness and all that, they couldn't pass down properly. Either got very watered down. I don't know exactly, what the issue was. But for some reason, Rebbe says they didn't pass it down the right way. And if it didn't get passed down the right way, it means future generations, their belief and faith of God is going to be weakened. And because it's weakened, you have this whole story about the heifer that's killed because someone was murdered. They don't know who the murderer was. So someone's going to ask, if you tell me about this, about the generation, the greatest generation in the history of man, what about us? Is there any hope for us? No. See, that was easy. There's always hope. We're a very weak generation. I mentioned it many times. We are a very weak generation. Even so, I can't just say, wow, we're a weak generation. Whatever happens, happens. Can't say that. Got to work hard. Got to strive. Right? We have an obligation to pass the Torah down to our spouses, to our kids. Have to make it real. It's a very hard generation today. To pass things down. We do hopefully a very good job. Probably get about a 90% success rate. Probably higher. No one else can make that claim in Judaism. But it's hard. Right? There are a lot of forces out there, a lot of negative forces that make this very difficult. Nonetheless, we have to adapt. We have to use whatever we can use that's permissible in order to make it fun, in order to make it enjoyable, in order to make it come alive. Because if you don't make it come alive, it won't. It'll be stale as yesterday's bread. Wow, that's a great phrase. Stale as yesterday's bread. Very dry. Something very dry. Can you pass that down? Your kids will never take it. Right, one of my grandkids, right? Should be well. You give him something that's dry, he won't eat it. I mean, this kid's a hefty kid, right? So, hasn't learned how to walk yet, get rid of all his baby fat, but he eats almost anything. But he won't eat something that's dry. You gotta mush it, you gotta put something on it. Cheese, whatever. Whatever spread, you gotta put something on it so he can dig at it. You give him something dry, he won't eat it. He's not lacking for what to eat. He eats just about everything. Stuff that's dry, we're just speaking about it today. He won't eat. He won't touch. He'll mush. It's just like, it doesn't interest him. It's not mushy. Right? He likes stuff that's mushy. Other great kids don't necessarily like that. Okay. Right? What's the point? That's like a loss in the parable. Right? What's the point? If it's dry, people don't want it. And there's a claim against the ultra-Orthodox community. It's not Hasidic. That's very dry. It's all about learning. It's doom and gloom. They don't even sing, Friday night or on Shabbos. There was a story. A rabbi of mine, also a psychologist, so, he deal with, people's issues at night. And some kid was having difficulties in Judaism, said, he was dealing with, he said, my father's so ultra-Orthodox. He's so ultra-Orthodox. He says over the songs on Friday night and Shabbos. He says them over. Doesn't even sing them. Maybe he doesn't like to sing. Maybe he's got a bad voice. Whatever. But he just says them over. There's no life. There's no life in it. Even if he can't sing, okay. Might not have the best voice. But at least you try. But this is what this kid was saying. He's so dry. This kid needed to be more Hasidic. Right? Or at least see Judaism that's vibrant. That's alive. That's being lived. But if you don't have it in you, you don't have it in you. But you can learn. Not everything has to be so dry. But that being said, for this generation and future generations, the pull of the street and other things is much greater. Much, much greater. So we have to show how important the Torah is in a way for them to understand and live it. Because if you don't, they're not going to want to grab, they're not going to want to grab it. They're not going to want to be interested in it. Right? It has to be, you have to take it seriously. But you also have to know, when to be a little bit light. And how to give it in a language they understand. But to show them there's nothing else out there worthwhile other than Torah. Because Torah is so much fun. Torah is so much, so enjoyable. I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm not saying the lifestyle, okay, what you have to do, and the holidays, and this, and, school tuition, other things, all true. But if you have the base, and you love the base, right, and the base is very strong, then all those other things don't seem to matter. I want to remind everyone, I give a class, Duties of the Heart. We are in the Gate of Humility. Give a class every Tuesday, 9 o'clock New York time. I have 2 Q&As every week, Tuesday, Thursday. Usually Tuesday, Thursday, 10 in the morning New York time, 5 o'clock Israel time. I have class on the book of Leviticus every Sunday, 9 o'clock in the morning. New York time, Tanakh Talk, controversial issues. Monday, that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Eastern time, 9 o'clock Israel time. Pirkei Avos every Saturday night. It's 9:30 Israel time, 2:30 Eastern time. I give conversion class. Anyone interested in any of them can find me on Facebook, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. And anyone can send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RABBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com.